November 1944, a cold morning in central Texas. A young German woman walked into an American military examination room. She was thin, silent, afraid. The medic asked her simple questions in halting German. Do you have pain, any injuries? Anything I should know? She shook her head. No, nothing. But her body told a different story. The way she moved, the way she sat, the way she flinched when he touched her shoulder. Then she finally spoke. Just 5 words. Barely a whisper. It hurts when I sit. Those words unlocked a horror that made this American medic weep openly. What he found hidden beneath her clothes was not just injury, it was a map of systematic torture. And the people who did this to her were not Americans. They were her own countrymen. But here is what nobody expected. What happened next between this enemy prisoner and her American captor would prove that sometimes the greatest weapon against hatred is not revenge. It is a plate of bacon. The sound of bacon sizzling in a cast iron skillet, fat popping and hissing. The smell of smoke and salt in America itself condensed into strips of meat that would change everything. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back, then forward, then back again. Because this story does not move in a straight line. It echoes across decades. It ripples through generations. And it all begins with a question asked 30 years later in a place far from Texas by a young woman who would not exist without that plate of bacon. May 1975, Johns Hopkins Medical Center, Baltimore, Maryland. A graduation ceremony. Hundreds of families packed into an auditorium. Proud parents watching their children become doctors. Among them, a woman of 53 sat gripping the hand of a man 20 years older. Her hair had gone gray. Lines marked her face like a map of survival. But her eyes, when she looked at him, held something that transcended time. Gratitude. Pure and absolute. The announcer called a name. Dr. Catherine Samuel Brennan, Doctor of Medicine. A young woman crossed the stage. 25 years old. Brilliant. Compassionate. The embodiment of everything her mother had fought to become. The woman in the audience began to cry. Not quiet tears. Deep, shaking sobs that came from a place beyond language. The older man beside her squeezed her hand, and his own eyes were wet. She did it, Sam, the woman whispered in accented English that still carried traces of northern Germany after 3 decades in America. Our girl did it. Your girl, the man said gently. You raised an incredible woman, Greta. Later after the ceremony, Catherine would approach them. She would embrace her mother. She would turn to the older man, this Dr. Whitmore, who had driven all the way from Virginia to attend her graduation. And she would say something that confused everyone who overheard it. Mom tells me I exist because of bacon. I did not understand until I learned the full story. And then the story would pour out, not all at once, not in any neat order, but in fragments and flashbacks and memories that smelled like mesquite smoke and tasted like freedom and sounded like 5 words whispered in a Texas examination room when the world was still at war. It hurts when I sit, but to understand those 5 words, you must first understand the man who heard them, and the place where they were spoken, and the peculiar alchemy that transforms enemies into human beings through nothing more complicated than consistent compassion. November 1944, Camp Swift, Texas. 75,000 acres of central Texas rangeland converted into a prisoner of war camp. The land itself was beautiful in that particular way Texas manages. Rolling hills covered in live oak and cedar, fields of sage and mesquite, cattle grazing in the distance. The sky so big and blue it made you understand why Texans talked about their state the way other people talked about countries. The camp sprawled across this landscape like a temporary city. Rows of wooden barracks, guard towers, barbed wire fences, administrative buildings, medical facilities, a mess hall large enough to feed thousands, and everywhere the sounds of confinement, guards calling to each other, trucks rumbling past, the low murmur of 12,000 men held behind wire, German soldiers, Italian soldiers, men who had fought against America and lost, men who had been shipped across the Atlantic in crowded transport ships and deposited into the heart of Texas as far from the battlefields of Europe as the earth allowed. But the women were different. Female prisoners of war were rare, complicated. The camp administration had been preparing for weeks for their arrival. Special barracks had been designated, female guards had been requested, though not enough had arrived. Medical protocols had been written and rewritten as officers tried to anticipate needs they had never encountered before. And into this uncertain preparation came Dr. Samuel Whitmore, 28 years old, tall and thin, with hands that trembled slightly when he was nervous, but steadied the moment they touched a wound. He had grown up in rural Virginia, the son of a country doctor who had taught him that healing was not a profession, but a calling. That the worst sin a medical man could commit was to look at a suffering human being and see only an enemy, only a number, only a problem to be processed and forgotten. Sam had volunteered specifically for the female prisoner assignment when he heard about it. His commanding officer, Captain Douglas Vickers, had looked at him with open suspicion. "You understand, these are Germans, Whitmore, women who served the Nazi war machine. They are not victims. They are enemies." Sam had met his gaze without flinching. "They are patients, sir. And if they are wounded or sick, they are my responsibility." Vickers had approved the assignment, but his expression suggested he thought Sam was too soft for military medicine, too idealistic for the real work of war. Perhaps he was right, but Sam had seen enough suffering in the past 3 years, had treated enough shattered bodies and traumatized minds to know that cruelty was easy and compassion was hard. And the hard things were usually the ones worth doing. On the afternoon before the women were scheduled to arrive, Sam met the man who would become his unlikely ally in what followed. Jake Patterson, 35 years old, a ranch hand turned military guard. He wore actual cowboy boots scuffed and worn from years of real work, a hat that had seen sun and rain and dust, and a way of speaking that was pure Texas, slow and deliberate and utterly without pretense. Jake found Sam in the medical facility checking supplies and making lists. "You the doc they got for the German ladies?" Jake asked, leaning against the door frame. "I am." "Name's Jake Patterson, guard duty. Figured I should introduce myself, seeing as we'll be working together." Sam shook his hand. Jake's grip was firm, calloused from rope and leather. "You have experience with prisoners?" Sam asked. "Got experience with people," Jake said. "Worked ranches my whole life before Uncle Sam called." "Figure prisoners ain't much different from spooked cattle. You treat 'em decent, they settle down. You treat 'em rough, they stay wild. These are human beings, not cattle." Jake smiled. "I know that, Doc. Figure you know it too, which is why we'll get along fine. But I'm telling you, these German women coming in tomorrow, they ain't never seen nothing like Texas. Gonna be a culture shock." He was more right than he knew. The transport trucks rolled through the gates on the morning of November 14th, 19 Sam stood outside the medical building and watched the women climb down. 43 of them in this first group. They looked exhausted, frightened, and painfully thin. They wore a mixture of worn civilian clothes and pieces of military uniforms. Some carried small bags. Most carried nothing at all. What struck Sam most was their silence. These women did not speak to each other, did not look at the guards, did not react to the commands shouted in clumsy English and broken German. They simply moved through the processing with the blank efficiency of people who had learned that compliance was survival, that invisibility was safety, that hope was a luxury they could no longer afford. And among those 43 silent women, one stood out to Sam in ways he could not immediately name, but could absolutely feel. She moved differently from the others, more carefully, as if her body were made of something more fragile than bone and muscle, something that might shatter if she moved too quickly or bent in the wrong direction. Her identification card would later tell him her name was Greta Schaefer, 23 years old, former clerk and radio operator at a coastal defense installation near Rostock, captured by British forces in May 1944, transferred through several camps before being selected for transport to America. But in that moment, watching her walk past with that strange, careful stiffness, Sam knew only that something was very wrong with this woman, and that his real work was about to begin. The medical examinations began on the second day after the women had been processed, photographed, assigned identification numbers, and given prison uniforms that were often too large or too small because the camp had not anticipated the range of sizes needed for female prisoners. Sam set up a rotation system, seeing patients one at a time in a small examination room that had been hastily converted from a storage closet. It had a wooden table, a single chair, a cabinet containing basic medical supplies, and a window that looked out onto the Texas landscape. The first dozen women Sam examined showed the predictable signs of wartime deprivation. Malnutrition was nearly universal. Their bodies carried the evidence of months or years without adequate food. Visible ribs, hollow cheeks, a general thinness that suggested their bodies had begun consuming themselves for fuel. Several had respiratory infections from exposure to cold and damp conditions during transport. Others had dental problems, skin conditions, and the kind of minor injuries that had been left untreated until they became major complications. Sam documented everything carefully, prescribed what treatments he could with the limited supplies available, referred the more serious cases to the camp physician, Dr. Benjamin Hartley, a white-haired veteran of the First World War who had seen enough suffering to fill several lifetimes and who supervised Sam's work with the quiet authority of a man who understood both medicine and humanity. But on the afternoon of November 15th, a young woman was brought to Sam's examination room who was different from all the others in ways that became more apparent with every passing moment. Before we continue, I need to tell you something. This story will challenge everything you thought you knew about enemies, about compassion, about what it truly means to be American. If you have ever wondered whether one person's kindness can change the world, stay with me. And if this story moves you, hit that like button now. It helps us share more stories like this. Now let me tell you how a simple breakfast changed everything. The moment Greta Schaefer entered the examination room, Sam noticed the stiffness in her movements. She walked with careful, measured steps, keeping her spine unnaturally straight. And when she sat down on the examination table at his gesture, she did so slowly, with visible hesitation, and then shifted her weight immediately as if the position caused her discomfort. Her eyes never met his. Not once. She stared at the floor with such intensity that Sam found himself glancing down to see if there was something written there, some message that only she could read. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, the knuckles white with pressure. Her breathing was shallow and controlled, like someone who had learned to make herself as small and quiet as possible. Sam spoke to her in his halting German, introducing himself, explaining that he was going to perform a basic medical examination, asking if she understood. Greta nodded once, a tiny movement of her head, but said nothing. Her silence was not the simple quiet of shyness or language barrier. It was something deeper, more deliberate. A silence that felt like a wall built brick by brick to keep the world out and her secrets in. He asked the standard questions. Did she have any pain? Any injuries? Any medical problems he should know about? To each question, Greta responded with either a small shake of her head or a barely audible "nein" that seemed to cost her enormous effort to produce. Her voice when it came was rough and unused, like a door hinge that had rusted from lack of movement. But Sam had been trained to observe. And observation was revealing things that Greta's words were trying to hide. When he asked her to take a deep breath so he could listen to her lungs, she complied. But he noticed the way she winced slightly, the way her left shoulder seemed to lock when she tried to expand her chest fully. When he gently touched her shoulder blade to position his stethoscope, she went rigid, her entire body tensing like an animal expecting a blow. "Does this hurt?" Sam asked in German, keeping his voice soft, keeping his hands light and visible. Another headshake, but her face told a different story. A muscle in her jaw twitched. Her breathing had become even more shallow. And when Sam pressed gently on the shoulder joint itself, asking her to move her arm forward and back, the movement was restricted, painful, accompanied by a sound she could not quite suppress, a small intake of breath that spoke of agony being carefully managed and deliberately hidden. According to the Geneva Convention, prisoners of war were required to receive medical care equivalent to that provided to the capturing nation's own forces. In practice, this meant that Sam had both the authority and the obligation to conduct thorough examinations, to document all injuries, to provide treatment. But he also understood that authority meant nothing to someone who had learned to fear it. That obligation could not override the deep human instinct to protect oneself by hiding vulnerability. He stepped back, giving Greta space, spoke to her again in his careful German. "I am here to help you. You are safe now. If you are injured, I need to know so I can treat you properly." For the first time, Greta's eyes flickered up to meet his, just for a moment, just long enough for Sam to see what lived behind them. Fear, yes, but also something else, something that looked like the terrible weight of a secret too heavy to carry alone, but too dangerous to share. Then her gaze dropped again to the floor. The wall rebuilt itself. The silence returned thicker than before. Sam made a decision in that moment that would change everything that followed. He could have simply noted in Greta's file that she appeared healthy enough, that she showed signs of malnutrition like the others, and moved on to the next patient in the long line of women waiting to be examined. He could have accepted her silence as an answer, her denials as truth, her carefully constructed wall as something too solid to breach. But something in that brief moment of eye contact had communicated a plea that her words could not or would not speak. And Sam had spent too many years learning to read the language of suffering to ignore it now. "I need to examine your shoulder more carefully," he said in German, speaking slowly so she could understand each word. "I believe you have an injury there. It may be serious. I cannot help you if I do not know what is wrong." Greta's hands tightened in her lap. For a long moment she did not move, did not speak, did not even seem to breathe. The examination room was so quiet that Sam could hear the wind moving through the mesquite trees outside the window, could hear the distant sound of guards shouting commands in the yard, could hear his own heartbeat pulsing in his ears as he waited for her to make a choice between continued silence and the terrifying vulnerability of truth. Finally, in a voice so quiet that Sam had to lean forward to hear it, Greta spoke. Not in single words this time, but in a sentence that seemed to tear itself from her throat with physical effort. "Es tut weh, wenn ich sitze." It hurts when I sit. The words hung in the air between them. Sam felt something shift in his understanding. A shoulder injury that caused pain when sitting suggested damage that extended beyond the joint itself, suggested trauma to the back, to the spine, to the musculature that connected the shoulder to the rest of the body. It suggested an injury that had been severe, that had been inflicted with force, and that had never been properly treated. "Can you show me?" Sam asked, keeping his voice gentle, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening, aware that he was asking her to cross a boundary that she had fought hard to maintain. Another long silence. Then with trembling hands, Greta reached for the collar of her prison uniform shirt and slowly, painfully pulled it down to expose her left shoulder and upper back. What Sam saw made his professional composure falter. The shoulder blade was misshapen, sitting at an angle that was not anatomically correct, suggesting that the bone had been broken and had healed improperly without medical intervention. The surrounding skin was marked with scars, long, thin lines that had the distinctive appearance of wounds made by something sharp and deliberately applied. Wounds that had been inflicted multiple times over an extended period. But it was the bruising that made Sam's breath catch. Even weeks after the original injury, the discoloration was still visible. A sickly yellow-green stain that spread across her shoulder and down her back, marking the ghost of violence that had been catastrophic in its force. Based on what he could see, Sam estimated that her shoulder had been struck with something heavy. A rifle butt, a club, perhaps a boot, with enough force to fracture the scapula and damage the surrounding tissue so severely that sitting upright compressed the injured area against the chair, causing the pain she had finally admitted to feeling. "Who did this to you?" Sam asked, though he already suspected the answer. Greta's voice when it came was flat and emotionless, as if she were reporting on something that had happened to someone else in some other life, in some other world. "Ein Wachmann, a guard, at the labor camp where I was sent before the coastal station." "When did this happen?" March of this year. 8 months ago. 8 months she had carried this injury without treatment, without care, without even acknowledgement. 8 months of pain every time she sat down, every time she moved her arm, every time she tried to sleep. 8 months of keeping this secret because speaking about it might have invited more violence, more punishment, more attention from guards who saw prisoners not as human beings, but as objects to be used and discarded. According to records that would later be compiled by Allied investigators, more than 27,000 women passed through the Nazi labor camp system during the war years, serving in various capacities that range from clerical work to ammunition production to forced labor in factories and farms. The treatment of these women varied widely depending on the camp, the guards, and the political climate, but reports consistently documented systematic abuse, inadequate medical care, and a culture of violence that was both casual and catastrophic. Sam examined the shoulder as gently as he could, But even his careful touch caused Greta to flinch, caused her breathing to become rapid and shallow, caused tears to form at the corners of her eyes, though she did not let them fall. The joint had limited range of motion. The bone had fused incorrectly. The damage was permanent in some ways, though with proper treatment, some function might be restored, some pain might be reduced. Why did he do this? Sam asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. Greta's response came in a whisper. I was too slow. I did not move fast enough when he gave an order, so he taught me to move faster. The clinical description of such brutal pedagogy made something crack in Sam's chest, made his hands shake as he reached for his notepad to document the injury, made him understand that what he was witnessing was not just one woman's suffering, but a glimpse into a system of cruelty that had operated with official sanction and without meaningful oversight. And he understood, too, that if Greta had hidden an injury this severe, there were likely others she had not yet revealed. Sam set down his notepad and looked at Greta with the kind of careful attention that a medic learns to develop when words are not enough, when the truth must be coaxed out through patience and trust rather than demanded through authority. He had found one injury severe and hidden, and his instincts told him that a person who had concealed damage this serious was likely concealing more. The human body, when subjected to systematic violence, carries the evidence in layers. And those layers tell a story that victims often cannot or will not speak aloud. Greta, he said softly, using her first name for the first time, hoping that the informality might help dissolve some of the distance between them. Are there other injuries? Other places where you are hurt? The silence that followed was different from the earlier silences. This one felt like a decision being made, like a door being slowly opened after years of being locked, like a dam beginning to crack under the pressure of water that had been held back too long. Greta's hands moved to the buttons of her shirt, trembling so violently that she struggled to unfasten them. Sam had to resist the urge to help her because he understood that this had to be her choice, her action, her decision to reveal what she had kept hidden. When she finally pulled the shirt open and lifted the undershirt beneath, exposing her torso to the harsh electric light of the examination room, Sam felt the floor seem to shift beneath his feet, felt his breath stop in his chest, felt every piece of medical training and professional distance collapse in the face of what he was seeing. Her body was a map of brutality. Long scars crisscrossed her back and sides, some old and faded to white, others more recent and still raised in pink. Scars that had the distinctive pattern of being made by something sharp and flexible. A whip, a belt, perhaps a length of cord or wire. There were burn marks on her ribs, circular and deliberate, suggesting cigarettes or heated metal applied to skin with the intent to cause maximum pain without causing death. And there were bruises in various stages of healing, from fresh purple-black marks near her spine to older ones that had turned green and yellow across her shoulders. Bruises that formed patterns suggesting boot stomping, fists striking, the systematic application of violence over weeks or months. But worse than the visible injuries were the signs of what had been done to her internally. Her rib cage was grotesquely visible, each bone defined beneath skin that had lost almost all its fat, suggesting malnutrition so severe that it bordered on starvation. According to medical standards established by the International Red Cross in 1944, the minimum caloric intake for an adult female performing light labor was approximately 2,000 calories per day. Sam estimated, based on Greta's condition, that she had been receiving perhaps half that amount for months, possibly less. There were also signs of infection. Several of the scars showed the redness and swelling that indicated they had never healed properly. That bacteria had taken hold in wounds that had been left untreated, that her body had been fighting a battle against sepsis without antibiotics or proper care. One particularly large scar across her lower back was weeping a clear fluid. Infected and dangerous, the kind of wound that could kill if left unattended much longer. Sam felt tears begin to form in his eyes, felt them spill over despite his efforts to maintain his composure, felt them run down his cheeks as he stood there looking at this evidence of systematic torture inflicted on a young woman whose only crime had been to exist in the wrong place at the wrong time under the wrong regime. He turned away for a moment, wiping his face with the back of his hand, ashamed of his emotional response but unable to stop it, unable to look at this suffering and remain clinically detached. When he turned back, he found Greta watching him with an expression of confusion and something that might have been fear. She was not accustomed to seeing her pain reflected in another person's face, not accustomed to having her injuries treated as something worthy of grief rather than indifference or contempt. "Where did this happen?" Sam asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Stutthof," Greta said quietly. "I was there for 7 months before they transferred me to the coastal facility." Sam knew the name. Stutthof had been one of the first concentration camps established by the Nazi regime, located near Danzig. It had held tens of thousands of prisoners over the years: political dissidents, Polish resistance fighters, Jews, and later women who were deemed useful for labor, or who had committed infractions against military discipline. The camp had a documented mortality rate of approximately 65,000 deaths out of 110,000 prisoners who passed through its gates between 1939 and 1945. Those who survived had often carried injuries like the ones Greta was now revealing. "The guards there," Greta continued, her voice flat and emotionless again, "they did not need reasons. Sometimes they beat us because we were slow. Sometimes because we looked at them wrong. Sometimes because they were bored and we were there." The casualness of the violence, the bureaucratic normalization of torture, the complete absence of accountability. These were the features of a system that had abandoned any pretense of human decency, that had given ordinary men extraordinary power and encouraged them to use it without mercy or restraint. Sam reached for his medical bag with shaking hands, pulling out antiseptic bandages and the limited antibiotics he had available. He would treat these wounds. He would document every injury. He would make sure that someone somewhere knew what had been done to this woman. And he would make certain that it would never happen to her again. But first there was a sound at the door, a knock, and then Jake Patterson's Texas drawl cutting through the tension in the room. "Doc Whitmore, got a minute? Sorry to interrupt, but Morrison wants all medics at briefing. New protocol for prisoner meals starting tomorrow." Sam looked up, irritation flashing across his face. He had been interrupted at the worst possible moment. Greta was pulling her shirt close quickly, fear returning to her eyes at the presence of another person. "Can it wait?" Sam asked. Jake glanced at Greta, saw something in her posture, in the way she held herself, something that his rancher's instinct recognized as a creature in pain. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat to her with unexpected courtesy. "You all right?" Greta said nothing, but something in Jake's tone and the simple dignity with which he addressed her made her look up briefly. "The briefing," Jake said, turning back to Sam. "It's about implementing American breakfast standard for all prisoners. Full eggs, bacon, toast. Morrison's worried the Germans might refuse it. Propaganda probably told them we poisoned the food. Captain wants medical staff to demonstrate safety. Eat with them first morning." Sam wanted to tell Jake to leave, to let him finish this examination, to give Greta the privacy she needed, but Jake was already backing out of the room. "Tomorrow morning, 0600. Don't be late, Doc." The door closed. Sam turned back to Greta. She was fully clothed again now. The wall rebuilt. But something had changed. She had shown him the truth, and he had wept for her. And in that moment of shared vulnerability, something had been established between them that went beyond the formal relationship of doctor and patient. "I'm going to help you," Sam said in German. "I promise you, we will treat these wounds. We will make you well again." Greta looked at him with those eyes that had seen too much. And for the first time since entering the room, she spoke more than a few words. Why, she asked. "Why do you care I am German? I am your enemy." Sam sat down on the small stool, bringing himself to her eye level, removing the hierarchy that usually existed between standing doctor and seated patient. "Because you are a human being," he said simply, "and because what was done to you was wrong. It does not matter what uniform you wore or what country you served. No person deserves to be tortured. No person deserves to be starved. No person deserves to have their body used as a place for others to express their cruelty." He paused, then added, "And you are not my enemy, Greta. You are my patient, and I will see you healed." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once. A small gesture, but one that carried within it the first tentative seed of trust. What Sam did not know in that moment was that the breakfast protocol Jake had mentioned would become the key to everything that followed. That a simple plate of bacon would be the first brick in rebuilding Greta's humanity. That food of all things would prove to be a weapon more powerful than any propaganda, more effective than any speech about American values. Because sometimes the greatest truths are the simplest ones. And in Texas, breakfast was sacred. The night after that first examination, Sam could not sleep. He lay in his barracks staring at the ceiling, seeing again and again the map of brutality written across Greta Schaefer's body, seeing the scars, the burns, the infected wound that wept clear fluid and threatened her life with every passing day. But more than the physical damage, he kept seeing her eyes, the confusion when he had wept for her, as if kindness were a language she no longer understood. He had treated her wounds that afternoon as gently as he could, cleaning the infected scar with antiseptic that hissed and bubbled against damaged tissue, the sound sharp in the quiet room, Greta's breathing catching but not crying out. She had learned long ago not to cry out. Sam's hands had been steady despite the rage building in his chest, steady as he applied fresh bandages, steady as he wrote detailed notes in her medical file, steady as he made a promise to himself that this woman would heal, that someone would pay attention to what had been done, that her suffering would not be invisible anymore. But now in the darkness, his hand shook. He thought about his father, the country doctor in Virginia who had taught him that healing was sacred work, who had said that when you see suffering, you have only two choices: turn away or bear witness. His father had never turned away, not from poverty, not from disease, not from the hardest cases that other doctors refused. And Sam would not turn away now. At dawn, he rose and walked through the November cold to the medical facility. Dr. Hartley was already there reviewing patient files. The old man looked up as Sam entered. "Could not sleep?" Hartley asked. "The German woman, prisoner 22847, Greta Schaefer. I saw your notes, the shoulder fracture, the infected wound, the malnutrition." Hartley removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. "I also saw what you did not write in the medical file, that you wept." Sam stiffened. That was unprofessional. That was human. Hartley replaced his glasses. "Sam, I have been doing this work for 40 years. I have seen doctors who can cut into a body without flinching, but who have forgotten how to feel. And I have seen doctors who feel too much and burn out within a year. You are neither. You are a doctor who sees the person inside the patient. Never apologize for that." "Her injuries," Sam said quietly, "they were inflicted by her own people, by German guards at Stutthof. For 8 months she carried that damage without treatment." Hartley nodded. "The camps. We are only beginning to understand the full extent of what happened in those places. But Sam, you need to prepare yourself. When the war ends, when the camps are liberated, what we find there will be worse than anything you have seen on this woman's body. Much worse. How do I help her? You already are. You documented her injuries. You treated the infection. You saw her as a person deserving of care. That is more than most would do." Hartley paused. "But there is something else you need to know. There is a breakfast briefing this morning. New protocol. You should attend." The briefing was held in the mess hall at 600 hours. Captain Vickers stood at the front of the room, addressing a group of medical staff, kitchen personnel, and senior guards. Sergeant Frank Morrison stood beside him, notebook in hand. Morrison was 45, a career soldier with eyes that missed nothing and a devotion to regulations that bordered on obsession. "Gentlemen," Vickers began, "effective tomorrow morning, all prisoners of war will receive American standard breakfast rations: eggs, bacon, toast, coffee. This is in accordance with Geneva Convention requirements that prisoners receive equivalent nutrition to our own forces." A murmur went through the room. The German and Italian male prisoners had been receiving adequate food, but this represented a significant upgrade in quality and quantity. "However," Vickers continued, "we anticipate resistance from the female prisoners. Intelligence reports indicate that Nazi propaganda has told these women that Americans poison food given to prisoners, that we use meals as a method of execution." Sam felt his stomach turn. Of course. Of course they would have been told that. After Stutthof, after months of watching guards use food as punishment and control, why would they trust American generosity? "Medical staff will eat first," Vickers said, looking directly at Sam and the other doctors, "in front of the prisoners. You will demonstrate that the food is safe. Kitchen staff, I want the first morning meal to be exceptional. Show these women what American abundance looks like. Show them we are not their propaganda. Morrison spoke up. Sir, respectfully, is this wise? These are enemy prisoners. Providing them with the same quality food as our own men sends the wrong message. The message it sends, Vickers said coldly, is that America follows the rules of war even when our enemies do not. Dismissed. As the group filed out, Jake Patterson fell into step beside Sam. You look like you did not sleep, Doc. I did not. The German woman from yesterday, the one with the shoulder. Sam glanced at him. How did you know? Saw her moving through the yard this morning. Saw the way she sits, like every bone hurts. Jake adjusted his hat. My granddaddy had a horse once. Meanest stallion you ever saw. Previous owner had beaten it near to death. Granddaddy spent 2 years earning that horse's trust. Fed it by hand every day. Talked to it gentle. Never raised his voice. Eventually that horse became the most loyal animal on the ranch. He looked at Sam. Sometimes the most broken things just need someone to be patient with them. She is not a horse, Jake. I know that. But the principle holds. That woman's been broken by people who were supposed to protect her. Now she is here. And you got a chance to show her not everyone with power uses it to hurt. Jake tipped his hat. See you at breakfast, Doc. The next morning arrived cold and clear. The sun rising over the Texas hills painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the camp kitchen, cast iron skillets heated on industrial stoves. The smell began early. Bacon, strips of fatty pork sizzling and popping. The sound like small firecrackers. The scent rich and smoky and utterly American. Eggs scrambled with butter until they were fluffy and golden. Toast browned to perfection. Coffee brewed strong and hot. The cooks were German prisoners themselves. Men who had been trained in the kitchen and who now prepared meals under supervision. They worked with the focused efficiency of professionals, but Sam noticed the way they glanced at each other. The way they breathed in the smell of bacon, and their expressions softened. How long had it been since they had eaten like this? How long since they had been allowed to cook food that was not rationed down to bare survival? At 0700, the female prisoners filed into the mess hall. 43 women moving in silent formation. Guards positioned at the exits. More guards along the walls. And at the head of the room, a table where Sam, Dr. Hartley, 2 nurses, and Captain Vickers sat. In front of them, plates piled high with food. Sam watched the women enter. Watched their faces. Saw the fear. The suspicion. The way their eyes tracked to the food and then away as if looking too long might be dangerous. And there in the middle of the group, Greta Schaefer, moving carefully, sitting down slowly at one of the long tables, her expression blank, her hands folded in her lap. Captain Vickers stood. You are being served American military breakfast, he announced in German. His accent was terrible but understandable. This food is not poisoned. It is not a trick. It is the same food our own soldiers eat. To demonstrate this, our medical staff will eat first. You will watch. Then you will be served. He sat, and on cue, Sam and the others began to eat. The bacon was crispy, salty, perfect. Sam had eaten bacon 1,000 times in his life, but never with such acute awareness, never knowing that every bite was being watched by 43 pairs of eyes that had learned to expect cruelty disguised as kindness. He chewed slowly, swallowed, took a sip of coffee, ate a forkful of eggs, made eye contact with several of the women, smiled, tried to communicate through his actions what words could not convey. You are safe here. This food is real. You will not be punished for eating it. The other medical staff did the same. Dr. Hartley ate with the calm deliberation of a man who had done this before. The nurses smiled and the women made small gestures of reassurance. And gradually, slowly, the kitchen staff began bringing plates to the prisoner tables. Most of the women stared at their plates as if they were hallucinations, as if the food might disappear if they blinked. One young woman, perhaps 19 years old, reached out a trembling hand and picked up a piece of bacon. She held it like it might bite. Or then, with the courage of desperation, she took a bite. Her eyes widened. Her mouth moved, chewing slowly. And then tears began to stream down her face. Not from pain, not from fear, but from the simple, overwhelming sensation of tasting something good after months of eating rotten vegetables and moldy bread and scraps that pigs would have refused. That was the signal the others needed. Slowly at first then, with increasing confidence, the women began to eat. Some cried quietly as they chewed. Others ate in focused silence, as if afraid someone would take the food away. A few exchanged glances with each other, small nods of disbelief. Is this real? Can this be happening? Bam watched it all. Watched the transformation that food could create. The way a simple plate of bacon and eggs could communicate what 1,000 speeches about American values could not. We see you, we will feed you, you are human beings deserving of nourishment and care. But his attention kept returning to Greta. She sat at her table staring at her plate, not touching the food, her hands still folded in her lap, her face expressionless. And Sam understood. After Stuathoff, after 8 months of watching guards use food as a weapon, she could not bring herself to trust this. It was too good, too generous. Therefore, it must be a trap. Sam stood, walked slowly through the mess hall. He could feel Morrison's eyes tracking him, could sense the sergeant making mental notes. But he did not care. He sat down beside Greta, not across from her, which would have created a barrier, but beside her, which removed the power dynamic, which made them equals sharing a meal. Guten Morgen, Greta, he said quietly. She glanced at him, fear flickering in her eyes. The food is safe, he said in German. No one will hurt you here. She whispered something so quietly he almost missed it. Bei Stutthof war Essen Bestrafung. At Stutthof, food was punishment. Tell me, Sam said gently, and she did, in halting sentences, in broken fragments. She told him about the meals at Stutthof, how the guards would bring out food and watch the prisoners fight over it, how they would throw scraps on the ground and laugh as starving women scrambled in the dirt, how eating too much could get you beaten, how eating too little meant you were too weak to work and might be sent away, how food became another tool of control and degradation. Sam listened, and when she finished, he picked up the piece of bacon from her plate, took a bite himself, chewed, swallowed, then picked up another piece and held it out to her. This is not Stutthof, he said. This is Texas. And in Texas, breakfast is sacred. It is not punishment. It is nourishment. It is hospitality. It is what we do for people we care about. Before Greta could respond, a shadow fell across the table. Jake Patterson stood there holding a cup of coffee. He set it down in front of Greta with the same careful courtesy he might show a church lady at Sunday service. Ma'am, he said, tipping his hat, if you don't try this bacon, you're missing out on the best thing about America. There was something in his voice, something utterly without guile or manipulation. Just a cowboy stating a simple fact. And maybe it was Sam's presence, or Jake's unexpected kindness, or the smell of the bacon itself, or the sight of other women eating and not dying, or perhaps it was simply that Greta was too exhausted to maintain her walls anymore. She picked up the piece of bacon, hands trembling, brought it to her mouth, bit down. The taste flooded her senses, salt and smoke and fat and richness beyond anything she had experienced in over a year. The crispy texture, the way it melted on her tongue, the sheer abundance of flavor after months of near-flavorless gruel. She closed her eyes. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and she whispered in German words that Sam would remember for the rest of his life. Es schmeckt wie Freiheit. It tastes like freedom. Jake smiled, nodded once, and walked away understanding that something important had just happened, even if he did not speak the language. Sam sat with Greta as she ate slowly, as she tried the eggs, the toast, the coffee. Each bite seemed to bring her incrementally closer to some version of herself that Stutthof had tried to destroy. And when she finished, she looked at Sam with an expression he had not seen before. Not quite trust, not yet, but something approaching it. A willingness to consider that maybe possibly this place might be different from the hell she had known. That single bite of bacon became the first brick in rebuilding Greta's humanity. Over the next week, Sam would continue to document her injuries, would treat her infected wound daily with antiseptic that burned and cleansed, would work with Dr. Hartley to develop a comprehensive care plan, would watch as slowly, meal by meal, day by day, she began to heal. But there was someone else watching too. Someone who saw Sam's attention to this particular prisoner and drew very different conclusions. Sergeant Frank Morrison stood at the edge of the mess hall, notebook in hand, writing down times and observations with the meticulous care of a man building a case. If you have ever experienced a meal that changed your life, share that memory in the comments below. And stay with us because the investigation that is about to unfold will test everything Sam believes in. The simple act of showing compassion to an enemy prisoner is about to become the most dangerous thing he has ever done. The weeks that followed established a rhythm. Every morning, Sam would check on Greta. The infected wound on her lower back required daily cleaning. He would pour antiseptic over the damaged tissue, the liquid hissing and bubbling, Greta's sharp intake of breath, the smell of iodine and damaged flesh, then the gentle pressure of clean bandages, the sound of medical tape being cut and applied. Small sounds that became a ritual of healing. Dr. Hartley had authorized the use of precious antibiotics. Penicillin was in short supply, reserved usually for the most critical cases. But when he saw Greta's wounds, saw the spreading infection that threatened sepsis and death, he did not hesitate. "Give her the full course," he told Sam, "and document it carefully. If anyone questions the use of resources on a prisoner, it will defend the decision." The antibiotics worked. Within a week, the redness began to recede. The swelling decreased. The clear fluid stopped weeping from the wound. Greta's body, given the tools it needed, began to fight back against the infection that had been slowly killing her. But the physical healing was only part of the transformation. The malformed shoulder could not be fully corrected without surgery that was beyond the camp's capabilities. But physical therapy exercises helped. Sam would guide Greta through movements designed to restore range of motion. "Lift your arm forward. Now to the side. Does this hurt? Can you reach higher today than yesterday?" Small increments of progress measured in degrees of rotation and levels of pain. The nutritional recovery was perhaps the most visible change. Camp regulations required that prisoners of war receive rations equivalent to those provided to American forces. Approximately 2,800 calories per day for women performing labor. For Greta, whose body had been surviving on perhaps 800 to 1,000 calories daily during her time at Stutthof, this abundance of food was almost overwhelming. In the first 2 weeks, she struggled to eat more than small portions. Her stomach had shrunk to accommodate starvation, her digestive system no longer accustomed to processing adequate nutrition. But gradually, meal by meal, her body remembered what it meant to be fed. The hollow cheeks began to fill out. The visible ribs began to disappear beneath returning flesh. The constant exhaustion that had marked her movements began to lift. By early December, Greta had gained nearly 15 pounds. Her physical wounds had mostly healed, leaving scars that would never fully fade, but that no longer carried the immediate danger of infection or further damage. She had begun to participate in the daily routines of camp life, working in the laundry facility alongside other female prisoners, attending the educational programs that the camp offered, and slowly, cautiously forming connections with women who had experienced similar traumas and who understood without explanation what she had survived. Sam visited her regularly during this period. The visits were partly medical necessity. Follow-up examinations to monitor healing, adjustments to her physical therapy routine, checks to ensure the infection had not returned. But they were also something else, something harder to name. He found himself thinking about her case during his off hours, wondering how she was sleeping, whether the nightmares that she had mentioned in passing were becoming less frequent, whether the trust that seemed to be slowly building between them was real or merely the temporary gratitude of a patient toward a caretaker. He had started keeping a notebook. In it, he wrote notes in careful German, words of encouragement reminding her of how far she had come, how much she had survived, how strong she had proven herself to be. He wrote practical information, names of doctors in Germany who might help with her shoulder when she was repatriated, addresses of relief organizations that were providing assistance to returning refugees. And he wrote something else, something more personal, an acknowledgement of what their time together had meant to him, a hope that she would find peace and happiness in whatever life awaited her after the war. He kept the notebook in his jacket pocket, worked on it during quiet evenings in his barracks, never showed it to anyone. It was private, a gift he intended to give her when she left, a reminder that one American had seen her as fully human. But Sergeant Morrison saw the notebook. Saw Sam pull it out during a break. Saw him writing in German. And Morrison's suspicions, already aroused by Sam's frequent visits to Greta, hardened into certainty. Something inappropriate was happening here. Something that violated the clear boundaries between captor and prisoner, between American soldier and enemy combatant. Morrison began documenting everything. The time Sam visited Greta, the duration of each visit, the fact that Sam's examinations of her lasted an average of 45 minutes, while his examinations of other prisoners rarely exceeded 15. He noted the occasions when Sam sat with Greta at breakfast, the extra blanket Sam had requisitioned for her quarters when she mentioned being cold at night, the way Sam's face changed when he spoke to her, softer, more open, more invested than a doctor should be in any single patient. By mid-December, Morrison had compiled a 14-page report. Times, dates, observations, witness statements from other guards who had noticed Sam's particular attention to prisoner 2847, photographs taken surreptitiously showing Sam and Greta in conversation, the notebook confiscated from Sam's quarters while he was at dinner. On December 10th, Morrison submitted the report to Captain Vickers with a formal recommendation. Investigation for potential fraternization under Article 134 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. A charge that, if proven, could result in court-martial. Dishonorable discharge. The end of Sam's medical career. Vickers read the report in his office, studied the photographs, examined the notebook with its German script and personal messages. He remembered Sam's passionate defense of treating prisoners with dignity, remembered the investigation hearing where Greta had testified so powerfully, remembered thinking that Sam was perhaps too idealistic for military medicine. But regulations were regulations. Appearances mattered, and if there was even the possibility of fraternization, it had to be investigated. On December 12th, Sam received the summons. Official notice delivered by a stone-faced corporal. Hearing scheduled for December 28th at 0900 hours. Subject alleged fraternization with enemy prisoner. Bring all relevant medical files and be prepared to defend your conduct. Sam stared at the paper, felt his stomach drop, felt the walls closing in. Court-martial. The end of everything. And worse if he was removed from Greta's care, who would ensure she continued to heal, who would see her as a person rather than just another prisoner to be processed. He went immediately to Dr. Hartley, found the old man in the medical facility reviewing patient charts, handed him the summons without a word. Hartley read it slowly, removed his glasses, cleaned them, put them back on. Morrison, he said, it was not a question. 14 pages of documentation, times, dates, photographs. They confiscated my notebook. The one you were writing for Greta. Sam nodded. Hartley sighed. Sam, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you romantically involved with this woman? No, God, no. I see her as a patient, as a person who was suffering and needed help. But you care about her. Of course I care. She was tortured, starved, left to die. I am a doctor. How could I not care? You visit her more than the other prisoners. Her injuries were more severe than the others. You eat breakfast near her. She was afraid to eat. I demonstrated the food was safe. You wrote her personal messages in a notebook. Sam was quiet for a moment. Then, I wanted her to have something. When she goes back to Germany, when everything there is destroyed and her family is gone and she has to rebuild from nothing. I wanted her to have proof that one American saw her as human. Is that fraternization? Hartley studied him. Sam, everything you say makes sense to me. I believe you. I have watched you with her, and I see a dedicated physician providing exceptional care to a patient who desperately needed it. But you need to understand how it looks to someone like Morrison. A young male doctor spending unusual amounts of time with a young female prisoner. Personal attention, personal gifts, personal investment. It creates an appearance of impropriety even if the reality is innocent. So what do I do? Tell the truth at the hearing. Your medical oath compelled you to provide the best care possible. Her injuries were severe and documented. Ongoing treatment was medically necessary. Your compassion saved her life. That is not fraternization. That is medicine. Hartley paused. But Sam, you also need to be honest with yourself. Is there any part of you that cares for her beyond professional duty? Sam thought about that question for a long time. Thought about the way his chest tightened when Greta smiled for the first time. The way he looked forward to their morning examinations. The way he worried about her nightmares and her fears and her uncertain future. Was that professional concern? Or was it something more? I care that she heals, he said finally. I care that she survives. I care that when she goes back to Germany, she remembers that one American saw her as human and treated her with dignity. If that is wrong, then I do not know how to be a good doctor. It is not wrong, Hartley said quietly, but it is complicated, and complications can be dangerous in wartime. He put a hand on Sam's shoulder. We will get through this hearing. I will testify on your behalf. We will make them understand. But Sam, after this, you need to be more careful. The war will end, the prisoners will go home, and you will have to let her go. Sam nodded, but even as he did, he knew that letting Greta go would be harder than any examination he had ever performed, harder than any wound he had ever treated. Because somewhere in the process of healing her body, she had touched something in him that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with the simple human need to be seen and to see others. That night, Sam lay in his barracks unable to sleep again. But this time he was not thinking about Greta's injuries. He was thinking about the hearing, about Morrison's 14 pages, about the possibility of losing everything he had worked for, about the way the system could punish compassion as easily as it punished cruelty. And he was thinking about Greta, about what would happen if he was removed from her care. Would she understand? Would she think he had abandoned her? Would she retreat back into that terrible silence, back behind those walls that had taken so long to begin crumbling? Outside, the Texas night was cold and clear. Stars scattered across the sky like salt spilled on black cloth. Somewhere in the female prisoner's barracks, Greta was sleeping, or trying to sleep, or lying awake as he was wondering what would happen next. Neither of them knew that in 16 days they would both stand before a military board, that Greta would do something that required more courage than surviving Stutthof, that she would speak truth to power in defense of the man who had saved her life. Neither of them knew that the choice she would make in that moment would change the course of both their futures in ways neither could imagine. But first there would be the hearing, and the verdict, and the revelation that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do in wartime is simply to see the humanity in your enemy. December 28, 1944. The administration building at Camp Swift stood quiet in the early morning cold. Inside, a conference room had been converted into a makeshift courtroom. A long table at the front where 3 officers would sit in judgment. Chairs arranged in rows for witnesses. The American flag in the corner. Everything formal and frightening, and weighted with the power to destroy a man's life. Sam arrived 15 minutes early, wore his cleanest uniform, carried his medical bag containing every file, every document, every piece of evidence that might prove his innocence. His hands were steady now. The trembling had stopped sometime during the sleepless night. He had moved past fear into a kind of cold clarity. He would tell the truth. He would let the truth stand or fall on its own merit. And whatever happened would happen. Dr. Hartley arrived next, nodded to Sam, said nothing. The old man understood that some moments required silence rather than reassurance. Then Morrison. The sergeant entered with a thick folder under his arm. His expression was neutral, but his eyes held the satisfaction of a man who believed he was doing righteous work, protecting military order, maintaining proper boundaries, ensuring that the lines between captor and captive remained clear and uncrossed. At 0900 exactly, the 3 officers entered. Major John Patterson, the base commander. A man in his 50s with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much war to be easily fooled. Captain Vickers, who had approved Sam's assignment and who now sat in judgment of it. And Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, brought in from division headquarters to ensure impartiality. Major Patterson called the room to order. This hearing will determine whether Dr. Samuel Whitmore engaged in inappropriate fraternization with enemy prisoner Greta Schaefer, identification number 22847. Dr. Whitmore, how do you plead to this allegation? Sam stood. Not guilty, sir. Sergeant Morrison, present your evidence. Morrison stood, opened his folder, and for the next 40 minutes, he systematically dismantled Sam's career. He presented the time logs showing 47 visits to Greta over 4 weeks. He showed photographs of Sam sitting beside her at breakfast, eating with her, talking with her in ways that appeared intimate rather than professional. He produced witness statements from guards who had noticed Sam's particular attention to this one prisoner. The extra blanket, the extended examination times, the way his voice changed when he spoke her name. And then Morrison produced the notebook, held it up like evidence of a crime. This notebook was found in Dr. Whitmore's quarters. It contains personal messages written in German, messages intended for prisoner 22847. He opened it, read aloud in halting German, then translated. "You have survived so much. You are stronger than you know. When you return home, remember that healing is possible." He looked up. "Sir, these are not medical notes. These are personal communications. This is a doctor emotionally involved with his patient in a way that violates professional boundaries and military regulations." Major Patterson looked at Sam. "Dr. Whitmore, do you dispute Sergeant Morrison's facts?" "I do not dispute the facts, sir. I dispute the characterization." "Explain." Sam stood, chose his words carefully. "Prisoner Schaefer's injuries were the most severe I have encountered in 3 years of military medicine. When she arrived at this camp, she had a fractured shoulder blade that had healed incorrectly, multiple lacerations across her back and torso, burn marks from cigarettes or heated metal, an infected wound that threatened her life, malnutrition so severe she weighed less than 90 pounds. These injuries were inflicted by German guards at Stutthof concentration camp over a period of 8 months. She received no medical treatment during that time." He paused. "Let that sink in." "Extended treatment was not a preference, sir. It was medical necessity. The infected wound required daily cleaning. The malnutrition required careful nutritional rehabilitation. The psychological trauma required consistent, compassionate care. Any less attention would have been medical malpractice." "And the notebook?" Patterson asked. "Medical notes and words of encouragement written in her native language so she could understand them. When a patient has been tortured and told she is worthless, part of healing is helping her remember her own humanity. That is not fraternization. That is medicine." "Dr. Hartley," Patterson said, "you supervise Dr. Whitmore's work. What is your assessment?" Hartley stood. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of 40 years of medical practice. "I have seen battlefield trauma. I have treated torture survivors. I have worked in field hospitals where we processed hundreds of casualties in single nights. And I can tell you without reservation that Dr. Whitmore's care of prisoner Schaefer was not just appropriate. It was exemplary. He saved her life. The infected wound would have killed her within 2 weeks if left untreated. The malnutrition had pushed her body to the edge of organ failure. His attention was not excessive. It was exactly what was required. "But the personal nature of his interactions," Morrison interjected, "the breakfast meetings, the emotional investment." "Sergeant," Hartley said, turning to face him, "when a patient has been starved and told that food is poisoned, demonstration of safety is medical protocol. When a patient has been brutalized and told she is subhuman, treating her with dignity is medical protocol. Dr. Whitmore did nothing more than provide competent, compassionate care to a severely traumatized patient. If we are going to court-martial doctors for being good at their jobs, then this military has lost its moral compass." The room fell silent. Patterson exchanged a look with Vickers. Lieutenant Colonel Webb made notes. Then the door opened. A female guard entered, spoke quietly to Patterson. "Sir, prisoner 2847 has requested permission to address the board." Patterson's eyebrows rose. "The prisoner wants to testify." "Yes, sir. She says it is her right to defend her doctor." Patterson looked at Vickers. Vickers nodded slowly. Patterson considered for a long moment, then made his decision. "Very well, bring her in." The room seemed to hold its breath as Greta entered. She was escorted by the female guard, wore her prison uniform but stood straighter than she had in November. Still thin but no longer skeletal. Color in her cheeks now, scars visible on her hands and neck. And her eyes, those eyes that had once been locked on the floor in permanent submission, now looked directly at the 3 officers behind the table. She stopped in the center of the room. The guard stepped back. Greta stood alone. Major Patterson spoke. "Prisoner 2847, you wish to speak." Greta's voice, when it came, was accented but clear, strong in a way that made Sam's chest tighten. This was not the broken woman who had whispered 5 words in an examination room 6 weeks ago. This was someone who had found her voice and chosen to use it. Sir, I am Greta Schaefer. I ask permission to testify for Dr. Whitmore. Permission granted. Please tell us in your own words. Greta took a breath, and then she spoke truth to power with a courage that exceeded anything Sam had ever witnessed on any battlefield. When I arrived at Camp Swift on November 14, I was dying. Not only from infections and broken bones, I was dying inside. For 7 months at Stutthof, I learned that human beings are cruel. That power means violence. That I was worthless. A guard broke my shoulder because I moved too slow. Other guards beat me for entertainment. They burned me with cigarettes when they were bored. They gave us rotten food and watched us fight over it like animals. Her voice did not waver, did not break. She had lived through this once. Speaking about it was nothing compared to surviving it. Then I met Dr. Whitmore, and he did something I thought impossible. He saw me, not as prisoner, not as German, not as enemy, as person, as patient, as human being who deserves care. She looked directly at Sam for the first time, and in her eyes he saw gratitude that transcended language. Every visit he made was medical. He cleaned my infected wounds. He gave antibiotics when infection could have killed me. He taught me exercises so I could use my arm again. He sat with me at breakfast not for personal reasons, but because I was afraid to eat. I believed food was poisoned. He showed me it was safe. He showed me Americans are not what we were told. She turned back to Patterson. Her voice strengthened. In Stutthof, guards came to hurt. Dr. Whitmore came to heal. In Germany, I was nothing. In America, Dr. Whitmore made me believe I could be something again. He gave me back my humanity. This is not fraternization. This is medicine. This is what you call American values, yes? She paused, then delivered the line that would echo in Sam's memory for the rest of his life. Please do not punish him for being good doctor, for being good man, for showing me what America truly is. The silence that followed was profound. Patterson stared at Greta as if seeing her for the first time. Vickers' expression had softened. Even Morrison looked uncomfortable, as if realizing that his 14 pages of documentation had somehow missed the essential truth of what had happened between doctor and patient. Thank you, Miss Schaefer, Patterson said finally. You may return to your quarters. Greta nodded, turned, walked out with the same quiet dignity with which she had entered. The door closed behind her. Patterson looked at his fellow officers. They conferred in whispers too quiet for Sam to hear. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an hour. Sam's heart pounded. His hands, which had been steady throughout the hearing, began to tremble again. Finally, Patterson spoke. Dr. Whitmore, this board has reviewed the evidence. We have heard testimony from Sergeant Morrison, from Dr. Hartley, and from prisoner Schaefer herself. We have examined your medical files and found them to be thorough, detailed, and professionally sound. We have considered the nature and severity of prisoner Schaefer's injuries and the treatment those injuries required. He paused. Sam stopped breathing. This board finds no evidence of fraternization. Your conduct, while unusually compassionate, falls well within the bounds of professional medical care. The charges are dismissed. Sam felt the floor solidify beneath his feet, felt air rush back into his lungs, felt the weight that had been crushing his chest for 16 days suddenly lift. But Patterson was not finished. However, for the sake of appearances and to prevent future allegations, this board recommends that Dr. Hartley assume primary care for prisoner Schaefer going forward. You may continue treatment as medically necessary, but all extended visits should be supervised or documented by a third party. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Dismissed. And Dr. Whitmore. Sam turned back. What you did for that woman embodies the best of American values. Never apologize for that. Sam left the administration building in a daze. The winter sun was bright, the sky impossibly blue. The Texas landscape stretched out around him, beautiful and indifferent. He was cleared. His career was safe. But the victory felt incomplete because he could no longer be Greta's primary physician, could no longer see her every morning, could no longer guide her healing in the way he had been doing. Dr. Hartley found him standing outside the medical facility 20 minutes later. You did well in there, the old man said. I can't see her anymore. Not the way I have been. You can still monitor her progress, still consult on her care, just with proper supervision. Hartley paused. Sam, the board was right. The appearance of impropriety can be as damaging as actual impropriety. This protects both of you. I know, Sam stopped, could not finish the sentence. You care about her, more than you want to admit. She is my patient. She is also a person, and persons have a way of touching our hearts, whether we plan for it or not. Hartley put a hand on Sam's shoulder. The war will end soon, perhaps in months. When it does, she will be repatriated. She will go back to Germany, and you will have to let her go. Best to start that process now. But fate, as it turned out, had different plans. May 8th, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. The war that had consumed the world for 6 years was finally over. Camp Swift erupted in celebration, sirens blaring, soldiers cheering, guards embracing each other. The nightmare was finished. Men would go home. Prisoners would be repatriated. The machinery of war would begin to reverse itself. For the female prisoners, the news brought mixed emotions. Some were eager to return home, to search for surviving family members, to begin rebuilding. Others feared what they would find: cities destroyed, families dead, countries divided among victorious powers. The Germany they remembered no longer existed. They would be going back to a landscape of rubble and occupation and uncertain futures. Greta received her repatriation notice in mid-May. She would be transported to New York, then shipped to the British occupation zone in northern Germany. Expected departure date August 15th. She showed the notice to Sam during one of his now supervised visits. He read it, felt something twist in his chest, felt the reality of her leaving become concrete and unavoidable. In 3 months she would be gone, would return to a destroyed country, to a coastal city that had been bombed repeatedly, to parents whose fate remained unknown, to a future that promised only struggle and uncertainty. Her shoulder still had limited range of motion. The bone had fused incorrectly and would never be fully right without surgery. Surgery that would not be available in post-war Germany for years. She would live with pain, with disability, with the permanent reminder of what had been done to her. I do not know what I will find there, Greta said quietly. They were in the medical facility. Dr. Hartley sat at his desk across the room, providing the required supervision. Rostock was bombed many times. My parents, I have not heard from them since 1943. They may be gone. Red Cross is searching for families, Sam said. If they are alive, they will find them. And if they are not, what then? I return to nothing, to rubble, to a country that has lost everything. Sam wanted to tell her she would be fine, that she would survive, that she had already survived worse. But the words felt hollow, because the truth was that her future in Germany looked grim. And he could not lie to her, not after everything they had been through together. That night, Sam could not sleep. He kept thinking about Greta's shoulder, about the surgery she needed, about the pain she would live with for the rest of her life, about the destroyed cities and missing families, and the sheer impossibility of rebuilding a life from nothing. And he kept thinking about something Dr. Hartley had mentioned weeks ago, something about medical discharge, about prisoners with severe disabilities sometimes being allowed to stay in America rather than being repatriated to countries that could not care for them. The next morning, Sam found Hartley in his office. The medical discharge you mentioned, for prisoners with disabilities, is that actually possible? Hartley looked up from his paperwork, studied Sam's face. In rare cases, yes. If a prisoner's injuries prevent travel or prevent them from functioning in their destroyed homeland, they can be discharged to displaced person status. They stay in America as refugees, eventually eligible for citizenship. Could Greta qualify? Her shoulder injury is permanent. Surgery is unavailable in Germany. She would struggle to work, to support herself, to survive in a country with limited resources. Hartley leaned back in his chair. Yes, I believe she could qualify. But Sam, she would need a sponsor. An American citizen willing to vouch for her, to help her find housing and employment, to take responsibility for her integration. I could sponsor her. After the investigation, after Morrison's allegations, after the board specifically recommended you maintain distance. The war is over, regulations are changing, and this is the right thing to do. Hartley was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. It is the right thing, but Sam, you need to ask yourself why you are doing this. Is it purely medical concern? Or is there something more? Sam thought about that question, thought about the way his chest tightened when Greta smiled, the way he looked forward to seeing her even during supervised visits, the way he worried about her future in ways that went beyond professional concern. I don't know, he admitted, but I know that sending her back to Germany to suffer is wrong when we have the ability to help her here. Then we will petition for medical discharge. But Sam, she has to want it. This has to be her choice. 2 weeks later, Sam sat with Greta in the small garden behind the medical facility. It was June now, the Texas summer approaching, heat building, wildflowers blooming in patches of color. Hartley was nearby reading a book, providing supervision while giving them the illusion of privacy. Sam explained the medical discharge option, told her she could stay in America as a displaced person, could work, live freely, eventually apply for citizenship. He would sponsor her, help her find housing through refugee organizations, support her integration. Greta listened in silence. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time, stared at the Texas landscape, at the rolling hills, and the big sky and the land that had become familiar over 7 months. If I stay, she said finally, I may never see Germany again, never find my parents, never know what happened to them. Red Cross will continue searching. If they find your family, you could return later. But Greta, you cannot help them if you are struggling to survive yourself. What would I do here? I was a clerk and radio operator. I speak poor English. I have no family, no home. You would learn, you would work, you would build a new life. Sam paused. You would be free. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and asked the question that had been unspoken between them for months. If I stay, would I see you again? Sam's heart stopped, restarted. Yes, as friends, if you want. Friends, she repeated, testing the word. I do not remember how to have friends. Stutthof taught me everyone is enemy or victim, nothing in between. Then you would learn that too. Learn to trust, learn to hope, learn to live without fear. Greta smiled, a small, fragile thing, but real. You make it sound simple. It will not be simple. It will be hard. Building a new life is always hard, but hard is better than impossible. And going back to Germany right now feels impossible. She was quiet again, then nodded once, a decision made. Then I stay. The medical discharge petition was filed in early July. Dr. Hartley prepared comprehensive documentation, photographs of Greta's shoulder showing the malformation, X-rays revealing how the bone had fused incorrectly, medical prognosis stating that without corrective surgery, she would have permanent disability and chronic pain, statement that such surgery was unavailable in occupied Germany and would not be available for years. The military board reviewed the petition. Major Patterson, who had presided over the fraternization hearing and who remembered Greta's testimony, approved it without hesitation. This woman has suffered enough, he said. Let her rebuild here if she chooses. On August 10, 1945, Greta Schaefer officially became a displaced person rather than a prisoner of war. Her status changed from enemy to refugee. Her future changed from uncertain return to destroyed homeland to uncertain but hopeful new beginning in America. On August 15th, the day she was supposed to board a transport to New York for repatriation, she instead climbed into Sam's car for the drive to Dallas. She wore civilian clothes donated by the Red Cross, carried a small bag containing her few belongings, including the notebook Sam had written for her months ago, returned to her after the investigation had concluded. Sam drove through the Texas landscape. Greta sat beside him watching America pass by the window. Rolling hills, cattle ranches, oil derricks, small towns, wide highways, a country at peace after years of war, a country offering her a second chance she had never expected to receive. It is beautiful, she said quietly. It's home now, if you want it to be. She looked at him, smiled. Yes, I think I do. They arrived at the refugee hostel in Dallas in the late afternoon, a clean, safe building run by a church organization. Women from all over Europe living there, finding their feet in this new country, learning English, looking for work, building lives from fragments. Sam helped Greta settle into her small room, promised to visit weekly to help her find employment, to support her as she navigated this new world. She stood at the window looking out at the Dallas skyline, and Sam saw something in her posture he had never seen before. Not hope exactly, but the possibility of hope, the sense that maybe possibly the worst was behind her. What followed was transformation measured in small increments. Greta found work at a hospital, first in laundry, then in the kitchen, then as her English improved as a clerk using the skills she had learned in the German military. Sam visited every Sunday, brought books to help her learn, answered questions about American culture, helped her navigate the bureaucracy of displaced person status. In 1946, the Red Cross located records of her parents, killed in a bombing raid on Rostock in February 1940, 3 months before the war ended. Greta grieved. Sam sat with her as she cried, held her as she processed the loss, helped her understand that honoring their memory meant living well, building a good life, becoming someone they would have been proud of. In 1947, Greta moved into her own apartment, small but hers. She worked full-time now, saved money, attended English classes at night, slowly, carefully began to trust that this stability might last. In 1948, she met Thomas Brennan, an engineer, kind, patient. He knew her history, knew about Stutthof, knew about the scars, and loved her anyway. Loved her for who she was now, not who she had been. Sam encouraged the relationship, attended their small wedding in 1949, served as witness, watched Greta in her simple white dress say vows in English that was now fluent, saw her smile without fear, saw her hold Thomas's hand with trust, and felt his heart both ache and rejoice. "Thank you," she told Sam after the ceremony, "for giving me my life back. You did that yourself. I just cleaned some wounds. You did more than that. You showed me humans can be kind. That power does not have to mean violence. That healing is possible." She paused. "I am naming my first child after you, if that is okay." In 1950, Catherine Samuel Brennan was born. Sam held her when she was 3 days old, looked into her tiny face and understood that this child would not exist without that examination room in Texas, without 5 words whispered in pain, without a plate of bacon that tasted like freedom. The years passed. Sam returned to Virginia in his country practice, treated every patient with the gentleness he had learned from Greta. Never married, too dedicated to his work, too aware that his heart had been touched by something that could never quite be replicated. He visited Greta's family occasionally, watched Catherine grow, brilliant, compassionate, determined to become a doctor like the man whose name she carried. And then in May 1975, the letter arrived, handwritten, from Catherine. "Dear Dr. Whitmore, you may not remember me well, though we met when I was young. I am Catherine, Greta's daughter. I am graduating Johns Hopkins Medical School this May. My mother insists you must attend. She says I would not exist, would not be a doctor without you. Please come. There is something we want to tell you. With gratitude, Catherine." This story has traveled across 30 years, from a Texas examination room to a Baltimore graduation ceremony, from 5 words of pain to a lifetime of healing. If this has moved you, please share it, because stories of mercy overcoming hatred need to be told. Now let me show you how it all came full circle. Sam took the train to Baltimore, sat in the crowded auditorium among hundreds of proud families, found Greta in the crowd, 53 now, gray in her hair, lines on her face like a map of everything she had survived. But her eyes, when they met his, still held that impossible gratitude. They embraced, no words needed, just the weight of shared history, of doctor and patient, of American and German, of 2 people who had chosen compassion when the world demanded cruelty. Catherine crossed the stage. Dr. Catherine Samuel Brennan, Doctor of Medicine. Greta cried, Sam cried, Thomas beamed with pride. And when Catherine found them after the ceremony, she said the words that brought everything full circle. "Mom tells me I exist because of bacon. I did not understand until I learned the full story." They went to dinner. Catherine wanted to know everything, wanted to understand how a plate of breakfast food could change the trajectory of lives. And Greta told her about Stutthof, about the examination room, about the map of brutality, about the morning when bacon tasted like freedom, about the American medic who wept for an enemy's pain. And then Greta spoke directly to Sam, her voice steady, strong, full of 3 decades of gratitude finally given voice. "When I was 23, I was dying. Not from wounds, though they could have killed me. I was dying inside. I had learned human beings are cruel. That power means violence, that I was worthless. Then you showed me I was wrong. She reached across the table, took his hand. You treated my wounds, yes, but more, you treated me like person. You gave me back my humanity. You made me believe healing was possible. Compassion was real. Kindness existed. And do you know what started it all, bacon? That first American breakfast. That plate of bacon was first time I tasted freedom. Catherine added, Mom's told this story my whole life. How breakfast in Texas changed everything. How one doctor's kindness created ripples that reached across decades. Greta nodded. I rebuilt my life on that foundation. Married good man because I learned good men exist. Raised my daughter to be healer because I learned healing is highest calling. And now she will save lives, just as you saved mine. She gestured to Catherine, to Thomas, to the life she had built from the ashes of Stutthof. This is your legacy, Sam, not just me. Every person she treats, every life she touches. It echoes from that examination room in Texas across decades. Thank you for seeing me, for caring, for being proof that mercy is stronger than hatred. Sam could not speak, could only weep as he had wept that first day in the examination room, could only hold Greta's hand and Catherine's hand and understand that his father had been right. Healing was sacred work, and the choice to bear witness to suffering rather than turn away could change the world in ways no one could predict. Between 1942 and 1945, approximately 425,000 German prisoners of war were held in the United States, housed in more than 700 camps across the country. The official policy emphasized humane treatment in accordance with the Geneva Convention. Many former prisoners would later describe their time in American captivity as surprisingly decent, sometimes transformative. But policies mean nothing without people willing to see humanity in suffering. Samuel Whitmore and Greta Schaefer's story represents something essential: the human capacity for both cruelty and compassion. In the camps of Nazi Germany, ordinary people committed extraordinary violence against those they deemed less than human. But in Texas examination rooms, ordinary people demonstrated that healing could cross boundaries, that mercy extended even to enemies, that treating someone's wounds with care could restore what brutality tried to destroy. This was not exceptional. This was one person choosing in one moment to see another suffering and respond with compassion instead of indifference. And that choice echoed across decades, changing lives, saving lives, creating lives that would never have existed. 3 generations sat together in that Baltimore restaurant, doctor and patient, mother and daughter, American and former enemy, all of them bound by the simple truth that kindness matters, that how we treat the vulnerable reveals who we truly are, that the smallest acts of compassion can build legacies that outlast us all. Today, right now, you will face your own choice. When you see suffering, whether in stranger or friend or enemy, will you respond with cruelty, indifference, or compassion? Will you turn away or bear witness? The choice is yours, and it echoes further than you can imagine. Sometimes the greatest weapon against hatred is not revenge. It is a plate of bacon, a gentle hand, a willingness to see the person inside the enemy, and the stubborn belief that healing is always possible if we have the courage to try. By. This is what America was built to be. Not perfect, not sinless, but willing to choose mercy, willing to feed the hungry, willing to heal the broken, willing to believe that our shared humanity matters more than the lines drawn on maps. Greta Schaefer tasted freedom in a piece of bacon, found healing in an examination room, built a life from the ashes of torture, and raised a daughter who would carry that legacy forward. All because one American medic refused to see an enemy when he looked at a suffering woman. He saw only a patient who needed help, and he helped. That is the story. That is the legacy. That is the echo that never stops. It tastes like bacon. It sounds like 5 words whispered in pain. It looks like tears of grief transformed into tears of gratitude. It feels like freedom. And it reminds us that the choice between cruelty and compassion is made not once, but continuously. In every encounter with another person's pain, in every decision to see or to look away, in every moment when we choose what kind of people we want to be. Choose compassion. Choose healing. Choose to see the humanity in everyone, even especially in those the world has taught us to hate.